All right, let's jump right in. Most of us, we think we know the book of Acts pretty well. It's that epic story about the beginning of the church, right? All about the apostles doing amazing things. But what if I told you we've been focusing on the side characters this whole time? Today, we're going to look at this familiar book from a completely different angle.
So let me ask you a question right off the bat. When you think about the book of Acts, who's the main character? I mean, the obvious answer is probably Peter, right? Or maybe Paul. The apostles. That's who it's about. Or is it?
You see, while we often call it the Acts of the Apostles, if you read it closely, something else pops out. The apostles, they're incredible for sure, but they're kind of like limited edition figures. They're part of a specific moment in history. The real protagonist, the one pulling the strings and driving every single event in the story, is the Holy Spirit. This isn't just the apostle story, it's the Spirit's.
Okay, so if the Spirit is the main character, then how does it actually, work? Well, the book of Acts gives us a super clear and consistent pattern. It's like a three-step flow that shows us exactly how the Spirit operates.
And this method is actually beautiful in its simplicity. It always, and I mean always, starts with the Spirit taking action. That's step one. Then the Spirit works through the Word, the Scriptures, bringing them to life. And step three, the whole point of all of this is mission, spreading the message. Spirit, Word, mission. You see that pattern over and over and over again.
Now, I know that might sound a little abstract, but the proof for this is incredibly real. We see its power most clearly when we look at the radical, almost unbelievable transformation of two guys at the heart of the story. Let's just look at the before and after.
First up, Peter. Remember him? After spending 3 years, day in and day out, with Jesus himself, he still caved under pressure and denied even knowing him. He even cursed to prove it. But then, boom. The Spirit arrives in Acts 2, and suddenly, he's a completely new man, standing up and boldly preaching to thousands. That change didn't come from more classes. It came from the Spirit.
And if you think Peter's change was big, Paul's is even more mind-blowing. Before Acts 9, this was the #1 enemy of the church. His whole mission was to hunt down believers and destroy them. Then, after just one encounter, one moment, he does a complete 180 and becomes the church's greatest champion. So you have to ask, what kind of power can cause that kind of total reversal?
Well, the answer, the real key to understanding this incredible force, is packed into a single powerful phrase that Paul himself uses to describe what's driving him. This phrase, it explains everything.
Here it is, from Acts 20, verse 22. Paul says, "And now compelled by the Spirit." Now, other translations say bound by the Spirit, and that word is so important. This isn't a gentle nudge or a polite suggestion. It's a compulsion, a binding force that is literally pulling him forward, even when he has no idea what dangers are waiting for him.
In fact, there's a Korean term, mayo, that just captures this perfectly. It doesn't just mean led. It means to be tied up, to be physically bound, like with a rope. It paints this picture of a force so strong that it's pulling you in a direction you simply can't resist. It almost takes your personal choice out of the equation.
So what does that feel like? Well, think about being bound to your spouse in marriage. That's a commitment that reorients your entire life, right? Or think about being enlisted in the military. You submit your will to a higher command. It's a powerful, compelling force, like being hooked on a fishing line or held by a leash. You aren't just wandering aimlessly. You are being actively, irresistibly pulled.
But this feeling of being bound isn't just some outside force pushing you around. It has a really powerful internal side too. And to get a handle on that, we can just look at how Paul himself breaks down this inner experience in his letter to the Romans.
You can actually see this perfect progression in his writing. In Acts, he says he's bound. Then in Romans, he says believers are led by the Spirit. So what's the result of being led? Well, Romans 8:16 tells us the Spirit testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. So being bound on the outside leads to this undeniable proof on the inside. And this brings up a really crucial question for every single one of us. Because the reality is, everyone is bound by something. We are all being pulled by some force. So if it's not the Holy Spirit, what is it? Is it the chase for success? The need for approval from other people? Is it just our own desires? Or maybe it's fear. Something is always pulling the leash. And the Bible presents a really stark alternative here.
In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus talks about a woman who was physically crippled for 18 years, and he says she was bound by Satan. This just shows that this whole idea of being bound isn't just a nice metaphor. It's a spiritual battle with two very, very different masters.
So as we wrap this up, this whole idea of the Spirit as the main character, of being bound and led and testified to, it all comes down to one final, very personal point for you to think about.
What is that primary force that's compelling you, that's guiding your choices and shaping your life? What are you tied to? Because really, the answer to that one question changes everything.